When I first started teaching after grad school, I was asked to teach a philosophy of gender course, which wasn't something I'd really specialized in before, but got incredibly interested in part because of how fascinated the students were. So one semester, students asked me to come give a dorm presentation right before Thanksgiving. And the only thing they asked was that I talk about gender. So I decided, since it was right before Thanksgiving, that it would be interesting to talk about gender in food. So I went to the dorm and I started by asking the male students what women eat. And they all immediately, salad, yogurt, non-fat stuff, diet cola, brownies, cheesecake. And then I asked the women what guys eat. And the response was instantaneous and unanimous: meat and potatoes, anything. And I asked what the consequences were if women overate. And again, everybody agreed, they'll get fat and no one will love them. And I asked what the consequences were if men overate, and the immediate answer was nothing. There really aren't any. Indigestion. And this led into a discussion then about eating as a gendered act. So what we eat and how we eat it says a lot about cultural ideas of femininity and masculinity. In particular, it turns out that women think of appetite and hunger as something to be avoided, right? Something to be suppressed, as an enemy that needs to be fought. Whereas for men, they're culturally constructed as being hungry all the time and as constantly needing food. And so for them, hunger is just supposed to be this constant state of being that they're figuring out ways of meeting. The problem is that both of these conceptions of eating are disordered, right? The traditionally, culturally feminine reaction to hunger as something to avoid or repress obviously causes a lot of issues. But the male side of the continuum, where the expectation is that people will just unthinkingly respond to hunger and overconsume, is just as disordered in a different way. Shortly after I gave that dorm presentation, I was asked by a colleague if I would write a piece for a philosophy of religion anthology. And the only requirement was that it be something feministy. And I asked if I could do something on gendered eating. So I turned to the Christian tradition to see what kind of resources it had to respond to the disorder in contemporary gendered eating, and was expecting to find sort of this rich, incarnational celebration of embodiment, and was kind of horrified to find that, in fact, there's an entire Christian diet industry which is devoted to making Christians thin. And the consistent message is that it's not just society that wants you thin, it's God. So when I talk about the Christian tradition, I don't want to make it sound like I think that Christianity has all the answers. It's got a lot of its own issues about embodiment and physicality. When I started to look at what the resources the Christian tradition had, and I kept digging, what I found was that there are these spiritual disciplines of fasting and feasting. And it struck me that if you think of gendered eating as this disordered continuum, right, between the classically female response to appetite or hunger, which is to repress, and the classically male response, which is to unthinkingly consume, that fasting and feasting offer correctives to both ends. So if you tend more towards the unthinking consumption, then maybe you need to learn how to fast. And fast not in the sense of not eating, but rather the spiritual discipline where you restrict your eating. So you restrict certain kinds of foods, And the whole point of it is to make you more aware of what you're eating and when you're eating and how you're preparing your food. So part of it is to make you more mindful about what you're putting in your body and your body's dependence on God. Whereas for women, a lot of women need to learn how to feast. Not feast in the sense of Thanksgiving, cram your mouth full of all the food you can, but feasting in the sense of coming together at the table with friends, with family, with your community, and enjoying the way that food fills your body without feeling guilty about it, right? Listening to hunger as a call to eating rather than as something to be avoided or repressed.